Welcome to my podcast story, the show where podcasters share the real journey behind their voices, from their first mic check to their biggest milestones. Every episode reveals the lessons, challenges, and breakthrough that shape a podcast star's journey. I'm your host, Wisdom Okonkwo, and I can't wait for you to hear today's story.
Oh.
Tell us your name and what you do.
Hi, my name is AJ or Abhishek Joshi, and I'm a relationship coach who helps married couples figure out what to do next when they feel stuck. Whether it's communication challenges, attraction challenges, boundary challenges, I help them figure out what to do next and how to get out of that stuck situation. That's where I come in.
Welcome to the
Now,
podcast.
yeah, my pleasure. I have a podcast called Beyond the Obvious, and I post a bunch of content about that on the channel. Make sure to check it out.
What's the podcast about?
The podcast is about the same topic. I get in experts from different areas to try and see what can be learned and what can be done different. So for example, crazy. I had a expert in health come in and try to talk about what couples can do to improve their health, how they can take care of each other during a health crisis. Or I've had intimacy experts come in and talk about what couples can do to have great intimacy. So I take different areas and try to bring experts in it and deliver value on that specific topic.
How old is the podcast?
The podcast is about 3-4 months old.
Oh, that's
Fairly
new.
new.
Yeah.
Fairly new.
Okay, I'm curious. What was the inspiration behind you starting the podcast?
I was really excited to learn from other people. I've been on other podcasts, but for the first time, my coach told me I should consider doing a podcast. And I did one or two and it felt incredible. I really wanted to do more of it. And I kept getting the feedback that people, experts who come on to my podcast, they had a great experience. I've had people who come in and said, I want to refer you to other people. And it's been a great journey.
Oh, wow. Okay. You started the podcast for about 3-4 months. And before I go into how the journey has been so far, you call your podcast Beyond the Obvious. What was the inspiration behind that name? Was it more like a short listing of names, or was it more of a eureka moment? And you're like, oh yeah, this is what I should call it.
I had a bunch of names come up. I shortlisted a bunch of names. I wasn't sure what to go for. But somehow when I heard the name Beyond the Obvious, I really wanted to do it. And there were multiple reasons for it. One, it spoke to the true nature of what I do, which is people have a lot of this information they get from multiple sources online, social media, friends, relatives who tell them all the advice they need. But when it comes down to actually implementing it, that's when the tricky part starts. And that's what I wanted to try and get into. What are the challenges that are not so obvious when people listen to advice, and try to help them even deeper at that level.
Oh, I like that concept. Now that you've started the podcast and it's about 3-4 months now, a lot of persons don't even get past 1 month. So that's a significant achievement. Kudos to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. What has been the biggest challenge you faced since starting the podcast?
Starting a podcast is a very interesting journey. At first, when you start your podcast, you're like, somebody come on to my podcast. You're like, I'll keep the doors open. Everybody can come in. Everybody's welcome. But as you start doing more episodes, you start learning, okay, I didn't like this here, or I didn't like this part. And slowly your filter starts growing, that these are the types of people I want. And so the challenge that happens is actually finding the right guests that you want to bring onto your show and trying to maintain that standard. I think that is the hardest part. I've been on podcasts where people invite everyone and they literally have ChatGPT questions read out to me, which isn't the best experience. But still, I mean, they are trying to create a platform and I try to deliver. But when you try to build your podcast and you want to create a standard for it, a level for it, it has to be things people are like, okay, I want to tune into this conversation. This is very interesting. These are things people are not asking regularly. I want to see what happens here. That's the true challenge.
Yeah. And then how many episodes did it take you to get to the point where you're like, oh, I think I've dialed in the feature. I think I know what I'm doing now.
I think after the first 10 episodes, I started seeing more patterns of what I wanted. what type of guests I wanted, what I would look for. If someone was going to apply to be on my podcast, what would I look for? And I started learning more about.
Oh, oh. Um, before we go ahead with other questions regarding the podcast, I'd love to know what the production looks like. How does the podcast get made? What's the behind the scenes from idea? You have an
Oh, that's
idea for
a
an episode. How does it get
that's
to published?
that is such a good question. Um, when I prepare for a podcast, first is I have to shortlist a guest,
Okay.
right? I have an overall idea that, marriage, relationships, this is the topic. But
Yeah.
I look at a guest. Sometimes I get applications. Sometimes I go see someone has posted that they want to be a guest. And I'm like, okay, they have some description. Then I want to see, do they have a very interesting story to bring to the podcast? Then I want to see, can they speak well on camera? Can they
Mm.
really deliver when they are in the spotlight? Then I want to see, okay, this is all great. Let me send them a request. If it matches, then I have to go behind the scene and do a pre-call, which is have a call before the actual podcast call to kind of break the ice of what's happening. In the first 10 episodes, what used to happen, people would come in and then it was very difficult for them to suddenly start talking about
Yeah.
their interest, what their expertise is. I wanted to create a separate bond. Like, it's comfortable, it's nice, it's easy. You don't need to worry about it. So I created a 15-minute call beforehand. And I would also explain certain housekeeping rules, which would help them understand, okay, what is the frame? What kind of podcast is this going to be? What's the format that's going to be? They get a chance to ask me questions. And that's the next stage. Then I give them a link to actually book the podcast, right?
Yeah.
Where I'll actually record it. For that, I 1 or 2 days before, I go look onto their other podcasts that they've done. What questions have been asked? What is their story? What are questions I would want to ask about this person? What are games I can create that will be interesting? And even if it's games I've done before, what questions will be very fun to ask? So I prepare for the podcast. Then on the day, I record it. And the setup, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I have a background that I don't change, camera setup, which is my iPhone. I have an audio setup, all good. And Riverside, very simple. And then comes the editing. I've been fluctuating. Sometimes I take a lot of time to edit. Sometimes I hire an editor. That part I'm still figuring out, that there's still work happening. And then the actual thing goes online.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. It's a fairly simple process. So, and it's a workflow. Okay. So you schedule you do the pre-interview, you have them show up. Have you had instances where people show up for the pre-interview and you're like, no, not really. It's not going to work out. It was nice, but nah, I don't think I'm going to go ahead with the interview.
So far, no. But if such a situation comes, I'll have to think how I want to handle it. Where I
How would
want
you
to
handle
be.
it?
That's so interesting. If I get into a situation like that, I'm gonna say I looked at your profile and I've taken certain things into consideration. I told you that we would be a fit initially, but I think it's not gonna be a fit, and I don't want to waste our time. So I think it's better we
It's
don't do a
best if we
podcast.
don't move forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that I don't waste your time.
Yeah. Because I've never had such instance, but I'm curious to see what that would look like.
That would be really. What would you do?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember now. Yeah, it's been a long time. I totally forgot. I've had such instance. Yeah, the guest
Oh,
hopped on. We did the pre-interview. What he said, what we agreed on was what we're going to talk about. And then when we started doing the interview, it was going on a different direction. I was like, no, 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 hold up. What's going on here? And I had to instantly just tell him, and we ended the meeting and we went our separate ways. So simple.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. I was listening to this crazy story that happened. So have you heard of Diary of a CEO podcast?
Yeah. Stephen Bartlett.
Yeah, yeah. So he had a situation where on one of the days he had 2 interviews. He had to do 2 interviews, and his research team sent him research for both the people. He spent 4 to 5 hours researching, and he was ready. He walks in and he realizes he has researched about the wrong person. He doesn't even know the name of the person. He doesn't even know who he's talking to right now. He prepared for the wrong guest.
Wow.
and he had to improvise on the spot. So he started asking questions
Out of
in a
curiosity.
funny way. Yeah, in a funny way to try to get to know
Yeah.
the person without making it awkward. And
Yeah.
I found it to be like very interesting because sometimes you're put in a situation you can't control and you have to figure out where to go from there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's where being curious about the topic you know your podcast is about is very, very important, because at that point in time there's literally no script. It's like meeting a stranger for the first time, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, so what's your name? Like, my name is
Yeah.
Abhishek. Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, what do you do when you're not doing this thing? And you're like, okay, okay. And then the whole idea for me is, because I've been in such situations before, is I'm looking for threads, right? And I'm like, okay, the first two, three questions are awkward. But once I see a thread and then I pull the thread, and okay, yeah, you mentioned this. Oh, tell me about that stuff. I'm curious about that. And for,
Yeah.
we're having a conversation 20, 30 minutes. But if you're not curious about it, that's going to be really, really hard.
Really hard, man. Uh, I think to be a really good podcast host, you need to be outstanding at listening and being present with the guest. If you cannot do that, if you interrupt the guest, if you keep overriding what they are saying, it's going to be hard because guests won't feel like what they came for is happening.
Yeah, it's a good thing. What's the word? It's interesting that we use the word podcast host, right?
Yeah.
Because like a guy, like house host, your goal is to make the guest feel welcomed, and
Yeah,
make them
exactly.
be in the spotlight.
Feel great about it.
Yeah, if you're
Yeah.
going to share all your exciting opinions and all that, which of course we're having a conversation, but if you're going to do that, why not just do a solo episode? So that's,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
drop all the
Exactly.
gems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so far you've been doing the podcast for 3 to 4 months now. What has been the thing you've been leveraging for growing the podcast to listeners?
Couple of tools.
Okay.
First, oh, you mean for to grow
Yeah,
my
grow the podcast.
audience?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I try to post a lot of shorts. I think what happens a lot of times on YouTube, especially, is it tries to use shorts to see who's interested in your
Mm,
podcast.
yeah,
And then it tries to get those people onto your main podcast. So
yeah,
it looks for the shorts first and then it goes to the main video.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing. The other thing I try to do is make sure you post on all your social media platforms and try to create clips so that people are interested to see what's happening. Those little tricks that everyone's trying to do.
Okay, so there's
Here's one thing that I found some of the more established creators do. I don't do this yet,
okay.
but there's something I noticed. They run ads for the same title. So let's say they want to release this podcast episode. They're going to try about 20 titles. They're going to try a mix of 20 thumbnails and they'll put all that out into into ads to see which ad is doing the best. And then they use that title and thumbnail to get people's attention on YouTube. So
Wow, wow,
that's
wow.
an interesting way to do
Yeah,
it.
that's interesting, and that's also what's the word? Quite expensive. I think YouTube you can do
Yeah.
that organically, but just that if you're
Yeah.
a new podcaster, you don't have enough audience to really test enough, right,
Yeah.
to know what works. Well, I like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when there's some dough, like I will start experimenting with that. Okay, so you do the usual, post on socials, and just release the podcast episodes. There
Yeah.
is a question I always ask my guests, and that is, does your podcast make money?
No, that's not my main source. I don't look to make money through my podcast. The podcast is to get interest from people. And it's more of establishing an authority in the field. My interest isn't to make money through the podcast. If it does happen, that's great. And that's further into the future. Right now
Okay.
is to establish authority that I'm a person who understands this field well and can really help people in it.
A follow-up question. It's a little bit different from the one I previously asked, and that is, since you've been getting clients, have you had clients who told you that they discovered you from your podcast?
Mm, what I've had is people who see my ad. So I run ads. What they'll
Okay.
do is they'll go see my actual YouTube content. And then they'll say, okay, I feel like you know what you're talking about. And then they'll be like, okay, let's speak.
And on the YouTube channel, you post mainly just the podcast episodes, or you do podcast episodes and then other things?
Right now, it's just podcast episodes. but I'm looking to do other stuff as well. It's still in the pipeline. It's still in the plans. I'm going through in between of a transition period, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. The reason I asked that question is, sometimes when I ask if the podcast makes money, the first thing we all assume is, oh, are you doing ads? Are you doing sponsorships? Are you doing brand deals and all that? But I'm like, if you have your business and the podcast is like a lead generator for your business, then it's making money.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A quick break. Before we continue, I'd love to invite you to join the My Podcast Story newsletter. Each week, I share highlights from our guest stories, behind the scenes podcasting tips, and resources to help you grow your own show. You can sign up at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. Now, let's get back to the episode. Earlier on, you shared the some of the tools you use, and AI, it's out there, and a lot of persons are leveraging it one way. Is there any specific unique ways you've been leveraging AI for your podcast?
I tried creating thumbnails with AI. It's not so good. At least the tools I tried. Okay.
Okay,
Maybe there are other tools
better
that
ones
are
out
really
there.
good.
Yeah.
The one that's been my favorite tool so far is one, the captions that gets created where AI comes in, tries to understand what's going on, creates the captions. Second, about a year ago when I tried editing my videos just using AI, so, to take out all the pauses, to take out
Yeah.
all the filler words, it wasn't that good. It would end up cutting out so much of what I actually said. Like they were meant to be in the podcast. Now AI is getting really good to be able to understand, okay, this is a pause. This is a real pause. I need to take this out. So it's getting
Yeah.
really good with that. Like I can see the improvement happening.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, the struggle I had at the beginning, especially Riverside, is when I would do magic audio. Since I'm not a native, what's the word, a native English speaker from the West, I just noticed that it's cut. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like me, and I stopped using it. And then one of these days, I was like, okay, let me just try it, and I was like, oh yeah, this thing has gotten better. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
it's improving. It's trying
yeah,
to improve every day.
yeah. The tools are definitely getting better and easier to create content.
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, and it's now a question of what do you have, what's the actual content, especially for those of us that are creating educational content, right? What do you have other than having fancy edits and sweet background music and all those stuff? Like, what's the thing there?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
AI is. I always find this sentence that I hear about AI very fascinating. People say whatever time stamp you take. So today, AI is at its worst possible.
oh
From
yeah,
here, it will only get better.
yeah,
You are looking at the worst possible version of AI right now.
yeah.
It's going to only get better from here.
Yeah, I think it's about it's leveraging it and finding way. Okay,
Yeah.
usually I've most of the tools we're using, they're all finding ways to bake in AI into it. Like Riverside, they're doing their own version. I don't know what hosting company do you use for the podcast. What do
Sorry.
you use to host your podcast?
Oh, I primarily use Riverside.
Oh,
Riverside is my
use
main.
Riverside for hosting. Hosting the
Yeah.
podcast.
Yeah. Just like what you're doing.
No,
Oh,
not
you mean
like after you finish where you publish the episodes. That's what I'm talking
where
about.
do I
Not
publish it?
record,
Sorry.
not record. Yeah,
No.
that's
Yeah.
good. That's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
hosting. Yeah, that's also hosting.
Yeah. 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 Okay, I get it.
That's what I meant.
I use YouTube, Spotify,
Okay,
Apple Podcasts. Those three
okay,
platforms.
okay, okay. Um, so you upload to Anchor, which is now Spotify for creators.
So I upload to Spotify for creators,
Okay,
and
okay.
I don't upload to Apple Connect. I think I connected the
Yeah,
RSS feed
and then
from
it
Spotify
distributes.
to Apple Podcast, so it directly feeds it there.
Yeah,
And to
okay.
YouTube, I do a manual upload.
Okay, okay. The reason I was asking is I wanted to know if you pay for any of this hosting like Buzzsprout,
No,
Captivate, and all those transistor.
no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Spotify for creators is kind of like a no-brainer. And I'm
Yeah,
like, nah, not
exactly.
really.
Yeah, exactly. It's no brainer.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, so I get all these things at no extra stuff, no limit, nothing. I'm like, I'll do it.
Of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and in the future, if it happens that they make some changes, I can always migrate my podcast to a different host. So
Yeah,
it's not like I'm locked
exactly.
in. So I did
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Prior to starting this podcast, did you have any background or experience with podcasting? Or was this your first attempt?
I didn't have any experience with podcasting. I had experience with coaching, which you have to use some of the skills of coaching to bring it here, to bring into podcasting, where you have to listen, pay attention, understand what questions to ask, so that the person in front of you is going to talk more about what they are going through or what happened or whatever they want to talk about. So I use the skills from there to bring into my podcasting.
Okay. And now that you've been doing the podcasting for 3-4 months now, what has been a skill that you can say, okay, this is the specific skill that I've learned from, podcasting, and I'm talking both soft and hard skills.
I would say if you're on podcasts, be a really good communicator. Like learn how to speak because your speaking capability will attract people. If you're not great at speaking, put time into it, learn how to speak, do it really well. Whichever language. I mean, it's irrespective of language, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing a podcast in a regional language, master that. Make sure you're really good at it because people tend to, when you speak really well, people want to listen more. But as a podcast host, learn how to stay quiet. Let the guests talk. Give them a. This is a trick a lot of people don't use. When when the guest is speaking, let them finish speaking and then just be silent for 5 seconds. Other things will come up and they'll try to add more details. Those little skills, incredible. And I'm talking only about podcasting. Okay. If you go onto YouTube, if you like, there are other skills, surrounding skills you need to develop to grow your podcast. But just as a podcast host, these are super helpful.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. What about you shared what you shared with us is what I like to call soft skill, being a good communicator. What about a hard skill? You're the one who produces your podcast. You're a producer, a host, director, everything all combined.
Yeah.
So what are some of the hard skills you picked?
Learning how to research and learning how to surprise your guest. A lot of guests have gone on multiple podcasts. So they've kind of, they're used to answering the same questions. They have their rhythm. They know what to speak about. If you do good enough research, then you can find some questions that will surprise them and they'll be like, no one has asked me that. And they'll have a great time answering it.
Oh. What are some of such instances you've had on your podcast where the guest was like, "Oh, wow, that's a very good question. That's a very good question."
I recently had, I think a couple of months ago, I had one of the top addiction experts come on to my podcast. His name is Dr. Rob Kelly. Actually, his episode is going to be released very soon.
Okay.
So he was trying to, like, when he was on my podcast, I was asking him certain fun questions no one had asked him about. And I think maybe 4 or 5 times he told me that I have never been asked these questions. And he told me that if you're not getting paid right now, somewhere along the line, someone's going to offer you money to be doing this. So just do what you're doing.
Oh, can you remember any of the particular questions you asked?
I have this game called The First Time and I create scenarios. So, for example, the first time I lost my pen, just an example. And people have to go back and think, when did that happen? Or in a relationship, right? The first time someone told me, I love you. And it takes people back to that memory and they have to talk about, oh, that's a story they get to talk about. What really happened? Or the first time I fought with my partner and they'll tell, okay, this happened. And those are unconventional questions. So that really gets the guest thinking. That it's really fun and new stories come out.
Well, one of the things I see about your approach is that it's smart in as much as not just on the questions, but the fact that what you've done is you've spent upfront time to come up with an idea that is reusable. So it's not just a one-time, we'll do for this guest, and then the next guest we're like, okay, so what question should we ask that will be really fun and exciting? It's more like, okay, we might customize the first time questions, but it's still a template that we get to use. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely. It's like a format I've created.
Yeah, yeah. And it makes
Yeah.
things easy, gives people something to expect, and that's brilliant. I probably will be adopting that. Like,
Thank you. Thank you.
wow, that's yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Wow. Oh, the first time I. Okay, I'm thinking of questions to, to adopt to my podcast. Isn't that the whole idea of these episodes? You know, to brainstorm ideas from other podcasters and see what
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
working on.
My pleasure, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Your podcast is very young. And it's a good thing because it means that the best days of the podcast are ahead of it, right? You know, you were talking about AI being or the worst state it could ever be, and
Yeah.
your podcast, it's at the worst state it could ever be. I'm
Yeah.
not saying your podcast is worse, but you get what I mean.
No, no.
Like, if six
I
months
I
from
do.
now you look at your podcast and you're like, oh, that's what was I even doing? It means you've not like grown to a level where like, oh yeah, right. And so I'm curious, are there future projects, things, goals, ambitions, you know, you have for the podcast that you love to share with me?
I don't have clear goals, but I'll tell you one thing. I'll reference back the interview I was watching of the host of Diary of a CEO, Stephen
Yeah.
Bartlett. And I realized the level of thought they put into their podcast. They have in-person podcasts, right? They research the music that the guest likes and they play that the first moment they enter into the room or the studio where they're going to record. They find the scents that they like. They make sure those scents are there. They try to find, little memories that the guest really relates to and try to go and find that memory and bring it back in some form for them. There is so much they're doing. There are like 100 levels up that you can go. And I'm doing everything virtually, but once I start doing things in person,
Yes.
there is so much more I'm looking forward to.
Wow. I never knew they did that. Like, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. There is so much. There is so much intention people are putting in. There's so much thought. So for example, something I try to make sure I do is when I ask my guest a question, I try to make sure I get a story from it because people love stories, right? But something I've also been thinking about, and this will be maybe a year into the development of this podcast, can I create some form of reel on the go as I'm recording for the guest and give it back as a memory? Or
Can you
some
expatiate on what you mean by that?
so in the interview I was watching, in the Diary of a CEO podcast, people come in person and there are camera people taking pictures of the podcast, of the guest and writing down important quotes. And by the time they leave the studio, they get a book with pictures from the podcast and the quotes they spoke about. And the guest leaves feeling, wow, this is incredible. And they feel honored being on the podcast. And I want to create that same sense. Even if it's virtual, what can I do? What kind of tools can I leverage to make this outstanding for guests?
So, still on this idea, how could we possibly adopt that for virtually? I know you know it's an idea you had. It's not like me. I just want us to like think of how we could possibly. No, it's nice in person. I see how that would work out, but how could we possibly adopt that for virtual?
Why not? If you can have a digital version of a photo album, which is Google Photos or, Apple Photos, you can do this. So in my vision, what I would have is I would have someone else join on my podcast, listen in to the clips of what's happening, take pictures, and create instantaneous using either AI or on the spot Photoshop to, create nice portrait pictures with the quotes and create multiple versions of them and then give it to the guest. I'm sure that's possible.
Okay, so yeah, that's true. We could do it two ways. One would be find a digital service, sorry, a service that does that prints physical stuff and deliver it to them. Because someone, I don't know, where are you calling from?
Sorry?
Where are you calling from right now?
Seattle.
Okay, so Seattle, right? I'm calling from Nigeria. That's like the other part of the world. So we could find a service in the US, and I would make an arrangement with them, and they send the deliverables down to you. Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I mean, it's just finding ways to go the extra mile, such that it's
Exactly.
different, and people are like, okay, yeah, wow, I've been to a lot of podcasts. Nobody has really done this before.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Oh, thanks. Other than that, are there other things?
There are other things that, you know, that I'm thinking about. Just trying to find ways of asking questions that can help people go deeper into what they're talking. Try to get more experiences that people can speak about. Do a lot more research. Right now, I'm able to do some research, but try to find ways of doing 10 times the research so that I have maybe 100 topics to talk about when a guest comes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, doing deeper research, finding ways to ask. The thing about the skills is that, the more you do it, yeah, that's true. It just occurred to me that while I was been doing this podcast for a while, I was like, well, practice makes permanent. It doesn't make perfect or better. Like if you want to improve, you have to be intentional about it. And
Yeah.
yeah, just showing up to record your podcast is not enough to say, oh, become a better podcast. You have to keep asking your question, how do I get better?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's a lot of ideas I have to adopt for my podcast. I'm glad that we had this conversation.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. I'm glad I could deliver value to you and deliver value to anyone who's listening to this podcast.
Yeah. When starting a podcast, one of the things to stay in the game for a long time is having concrete, clear terms what success means for the podcaster. And I want us to approach it in two ways, right? Because this is a very important question. What does success mean for the podcaster? And what the success means for the podcaster to the audience. So what I mean is that if I start a podcast, what am I looking to get out of the podcast? Right, that's one. What does success look like for me in concrete terms? Then the other thing is, if I start a podcast and people are listening to the podcast in 6 months, in 3 months, in 1 year, what would be the change that happens in their life that they will say, oh, since I started listening to the podcast, this and this and this happened. So in that regards, what would those things be for you?
There are two-part question, but I remember the second question.
Okay. Yeah.
For the guests, or rather for the audience, after I started listening to this podcast, all this happened. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, listening is only one part of it, right? No matter who it is, people have to listen and implement it. The best thing I can possibly do is to make a podcast so consumable, so easy for people to understand what's going on, that they're like, it clicks. Okay, in this situation, I can do this and this. And they just do it. And the goal would be to try and improve my communication to the level where I can listen and I change my behavior. That will be the ultimate level. That is level 100. But at the moment, if they listen and just think about it later, that's the first step.
Okay. So what about what would success look like for you as the host of the podcast?
For me, I think every guest who comes, connecting with them at a level they've probably not even had a chance to connect with themselves. Right now, it's still a conversation. I want to get it to the level where they start thinking about thoughts they've never thought about. And organically, it's not like I'm going to push for certain things, but they start talking about, let's say, their expertise in intimacy. And I learn skills to be able to ask questions in a way where they start thinking, I wonder where my belief about it came from. Oh, this is what happened when I was 10 years old. And so this is what connected me to it. And almost taking them into a trance of their own thoughts. If I can get to that level, that would be amazing.
Wow. Thank you so much, AJ.
My pleasure.
Yeah. You've shared with us some of the future plans you have. You shared with us the behind the scenes of your podcast and also the reasons why you started the podcast. And you've also shared the workflow of your podcast. Thank you so much. I have so many ideas that I'm going to adopt from this episode. And part of the reason I'm so glad, I'm like, yeah, I'm recording it. It's an episode I will release, but I also have time to go through it and say, okay, yeah, how do I expand this idea deeper and you really adopt it for my own workflow? Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm glad I could add value.
Yeah. Now that you've been into the podcasting game, it will be okay for me to call you a new podcaster. And what advice would you give to people who they feel like, oh, well, podcasting is, I mean, if someone who's been doing a podcast for 4 years, they're like, oh, yeah, you've been doing the podcast for 4 years, you don't really understand what we're going through. Like, it's easy for you to say, when you started a podcast 4 years ago, this was this, right? You just started your podcast 3 months ago. So I feel like you're in the best position to give an advice to someone who's just starting out, being that, you're just 2, 3 steps ahead of them. What advice would you give to someone who's thinking about starting a podcast?
Learn how to use the resources you have. First, for example, I used a free Facebook group to get my first 10 guests. Second, I used an online platform. I had a laptop, started off there. Third, I had access to ChatGPT to try and brainstorm, even though I didn't necessarily use the questions from there. It made me think, okay, these are angles I can think about. But I want to tell a lot of podcasters this: don't settle for the bare minimum. When I started my podcast, I was looking at podcasters who had 1, 2 million, 10 million followers and thinking in a simple way, how do I create that? How do I create that feel? How do I make people feel this podcast should be getting hundreds of thousands of views?
Yeah.
You don't need to go extravagant. You don't need to spend too much. You don't make it complicated, but make it extraordinary. That effort your audience will see, that effort your guests will see, and they will be like, this podcast is going to go great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that. And where you at the beginning of the episode, you mentioned the name of your podcast, but what's the name of your podcast? Where can we listen to the podcast, and how can we connect with you?
So the name of the podcast is Beyond the Obvious with Abhishek Joshi. You can check it out on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. I'm sure in the show notes you can link my social media profiles, and people can just send me a message there.
Yeah. Do you have a website?
I don't have a website, but I have a school community that if you want to come check out.
Okay. So I'll put the links mentioned in the description, so you can go directly to the sites mentioned. Thank you so much, AJ.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Wisdom.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I hope you enjoyed listening to this journey as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. It really helps others discover the show. And don't forget to join the newsletter at mypodcaststory.com/join for more stories and podcasting insights. Until next time, keep telling your story because someone out there needs to hear it.